Joined now by Laura Richards, former investigator at New Scotland Yard and host of the podcasts Crime Analyst and Real Crime Profile. Laura, thank you so much for being on. It's great to talk to you. You have this expression that I am fascinated to talk about. You say stalking is murder in slow motion. Take it from there.
Yes, well, thank you for having me on. And I use the term murder in slow motion because I've reviewed and worked so many different cases where there's a drip, drip, drip before the murder. And I mean a drip, drip, drip of controlling and abusive behavior. And then we have the homicide event. And often people don't see the psychological and the emotional. People look for physical abuse. But what I often see is that coercive control and stalking, they're the biggest indicators of a murder in slow motion and escalation when a rejected or vengeful ex-partner wants to take revenge on a former partner. So we can see this behavior within the relationship too, and sometimes we call it stalking and coercive control within the relationship, but the post-separation abuse, that's when it tends to escalate.
Okay, that's where I want to jump in, and I keep referring to this case as he's innocent until proven guilty. He's only just been brought before a judge for a 1-minute appearance. There's so much more still ahead in this case. But you've said that the separation step is the most dangerous time for domestic violence. Tell me about your experiences.
Yeah, so what we see is that 76% of women who are murdered by a former partner, they're murdered at the point of separation. So we know that it's a high risk factor. And we also know with jealous and controlling behavior, that's the biggest indicator towards a femicide. And so people look for physical violence, but actually it's the coercive control and the jealous behavior that is a far greater marker. And at the point of separation, this notion of if I can't have you, no one can, that's the tipping point where a man, and it's often a man, it's when women leave men, and they can bide their time too. We do see a lot of the murders happen within the first month and the first 6 months, but I've also seen cases where it looks like a hiatus of even 8 years, but actually there's been a lot of behavior going on within that period of time.
Well, that's fascinating to me because so far we've uncovered no evidence of physical stalking or cyber stalking, but I just can bet your bottom dollar that that's exactly what detectives are finding out now, having probably seized all forms of electronics in his apartment, his place of work, even a girlfriend or a friend he may have had where he had access to electronics. And so, and of course, the Tepe's electronics will have been there as well, unless they were stolen as the killer left the home. But I do want to say, like, the family says, yes, he was emotionally abusive. Yes, he made death threats, but there was no known physical abuse. So I'm just so curious about your take on something that, you know, could fester for a decade, that never was physically abusive, but that could, if he's guilty, yield such incredible violence.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. All of my research and analysis and what we know with domestic abuse, there's a term called coercive control. And it's actually the coercive and controlling behavior, the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse that underpins it. They're the tactics that are used. They're the far more significant indicators of an escalation to femicide. And that's why we mustn't just look for physical abuse. That is not the most significant indicator that something may well escalate. So we have to change what we look for. And equally, you know, when we think about they were together for 8 months and then she separated and she filed for divorce, Monique did, in 2017, but they were only together for 8 months, a very short marriage. So I want to know what was going on in that marriage and equally what happened to trigger her to move out. The filing said that they were incompatible, but something for me, there's something much more significant there going on. But like I said, the coercive and controlling behavior, we know that he's a surgeon. I've had many cases where someone is a surgeon, a doctor, a pilot, where they are very controlling personalities, control freaks. That's
And
biggest
we
indicator
know
of harm to women.
Yeah,
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.